Mhm.
Oh. We have to go leave your drink. Oh, I'll take it. Come on. Go in.
Okay, um, good timing. I guess if you're in Mape Shemesh, you probably also heard those sirens. Baruch Hashem, Shemer Hashem. Inei lo yinu v'lo yishan. Okay. This week is Parshas Para. Parshas Para is about the red heifer, Paraduma, and the Paraduma was brought Parshas Chukas in Sefer B'Midbar, and there discusses the halachas, very unusual mitzvah of all the mitzvahs we have. It's not the easiest to understand. In fact, it's very impossible for many to understand. There's different parts of it, but we're used to that. And there's lots of things. Tefillah itself is not something that's easily understandable unless you take it apart and look at the different pieces and see what's going on. But there's chukim, there's aspects of it that are not clear to us. I mean, this is Hashem's his machshavas, his idea of what life is about and what it should, what we should be doing and how to accomplish it. And his das goes much further than ours does. But Paraduma is an even greater example of this idea because of the fact, one specific thing. The Shlomo Melech said, "V'chok mimeni." It was distant from me, and Moshe Rabbeinu understood it because it's understandable on some level. It's just a question of how high up you have to go to get the answer. In general, the difference between what we call chukim and mishpatim, chukim are statutes, mitzvahs that supposedly are not so readily graspable, understandable, and that people laugh at us for, not eating milk and meat together. And one of the reasons why that it's a little bit confusing is because if milk and meat together is dangerous, so then why aren't the Gentiles also commanded not to, cook together milk and meat and eat that combination? They can eat it all they want. So obviously it has to do with the spiritual reality, not the physical reality per se, though it can affect the spiritual reality too eventually as after time. But the Paraduma has this one aspect to it, aside from all the various technical details, that the Cohen who sprinkled the waters of the chatos, the special waters that were created with the ashes of the Paraduma for the sake of doing this process of taking somebody out of the state of spiritual, what's called an avtuma, coming in contact with a dead body, or be in a tent with a dead body, and the hospital counts as well, which is why Kohanim in general don't enter hospitals. And in order to be able to bring Korban Pesach, you had to get out of that. If the majority of the Jewish people in the States, and there's a special heter for the Klal Yisrael to be able to be makriv the Korban Pesach, but if it's an individual, they can't be makriv or eat from the Korban Pesach until after they became ritually, spiritually purified once again. It's a 7-day process. So if there's 3 days until Pesach, that person's out of luck, which is why there's a second what we call Pesach Sheni, because for those people who couldn't make it the first Pesach, they could do it Pesach Sheni instead. And that Parshas Nasa with Moshe Rabbeinu and Aaron's nephews who had to bury Nadav and Avihu or take them out of the camp, which they're spiritually pure, they couldn't do Korban Pesach. It's all there. You can see for yourself. But this idea that the Kohen would sprinkle the person, and in the process of sprinkling the person, purify them and become defiled in the process. It's like two people washing their hands in the same tap, and one person gets clean, one person gets dirty. It's not logical, doesn't make sense. So how is it possible? Spiritually, it's possible, and these are things that are difficult, which is what makes it a chok. And even though it's true, as Rashi points out, that these are chukim and these are things that the Yetzer Hara laughs at us for and says, why bother doing anything like this? Shatnez, who cares if it's shat and not shatnez, What's the big deal? Nonetheless, after he says that, he says, but let me tell you a few of the insights we have regarding why we have to bring, why we do this mitzvah. And he brings down a medrash that says, it's really a medrash, Rashi's quote, it's not Rashi's own pshat, it's Rashi's just quoting the medrash, but the medrash says that basically it's like Hashem who says, if a mother took her child to the king's palace and that child made a mess, they would tell the mother to clean it up. So likewise, the Egel Zahav, which is a calf, made the mess. Let the paraduma, which is not technically its mother, but metaphorically speaking, it's the mother. So let it come and clean up the mess of the Egel Zahav. That's what it says. That's the idea. So the paraduma, therefore, the golden calf is gold, and this is red, right? What they understand why it's red, right? And the idea of a para, which is it's a heifer, it's a full-grown cow that's able to have a yoke on its neck, whereas a calf doesn't. A calf doesn't work. It just plays around the entire time until it's old enough to pull a yoke. So you've got this golden calf, which is basically, gold is eternity, and the calf is youth. So this represented the concept of eternal youth. That's what the golden calf was for them. So anytime someone is pursuing eternal youth, that it's an aspect of the golden calf. There's nothing wrong with staying, taking care of your body and trying to be healthy, but artificially trying to not act your age or not appear your age. I mean, again, within reason. Obviously, a person doesn't have to like look older than they are at that time, or if you can do things to keep yourself healthy and looking younger longer, fine. That's perfectly within the realm. But to make your life depend upon it to the point that to really, the truth is that's not really the real issue. The real issue is not trying to hold on to their youth as much as holding on to the youth for the sake of not having responsibility. Because that's really what youth represents. This idea of not yet being responsible for the world or for themselves even. I mean, at a certain point, teenagers have to start taking care of themselves too. But it's not like becoming an adult, getting married, having children, taking responsibility for yourself and your spouse and your family, getting a job or learning, whatever the case may be. But that's really what the golden calf represented. And that's why they said, these are the gods who brought you out of Egypt. Meaning, these are the gods who brought you. We were there. We know which God took us out of Egypt. Yes, that's true. But it's not the concept of God that you were going towards as far as you were concerned. You're coming out of slavery. It's not like God said, here, leave Egyptian slavery to join my slavery. I'm gonna bring you in and be my slave now. Didn't you want to have freedom? Didn't you want to be able to do the things that you want to do when you want to do them, not be someone over you telling you what to do? That's the God, so to speak, that brought you out of Egypt, that inspired you to leave the slavery of Egypt. Not this God, who on top of Mount Sinai, who's giving us 630 commandments that's going to make our life difficult. We're going to have to grow up. We have to mature. So they made this golden calf. But the truth is, the reality is that they didn't really actually make a golden calf. Maybe they had plans to make a golden calf, but how did they come up with a golden calf? How did this come out? How did they end up with this golden calf? Aaron Cohen says to Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe says, Aaron Cohen, first of all, what did they do to make you do a chet like this, even though Aaron was completely l'shem shemayim. He had not 1 ounce of doubt about Moshe's coming back. He was stalling the Erev Rav, the mixed multitude, because they had killed Hur, who was the son of Miriam, because he tried to stop them, and he realized they're going to kill him too. So he was delaying them. It was a delay tactic. They wanted to help build the altar. He said, no, I'll do it myself. I need to do it myself, knowing it would take more time. So he was completely L'Shem Shemaim, and yet, despite the fact that he was L'Shem Shemaim, Hashem wanted to kill all 4 of his children, not just Nadav and Avihu, but also Elazar and Itamar. He wanted to kill all 4 of them. Moshe Rabbeinu was mispalel on behalf of his nephews, and he was able to save 2 of them. Nadav and Avihu, they had to die anyhow. But what's even more confusing is that they were already chayiv misa on top of Mount Sinai because they looked at the Shekhinah. Rashi brings it down in Parshas Mishpatim. They were supposed to die at that time, but God didn't want to create problems at the time of the one of the most fantastic moments of all of history. So he let Nadav and Avihu live, but they were going to die. So it's like duplication to some degree. So Elazar and Itamar, they got to survive. They were never meant to die. It's all part of the picture. It's all part of the questions that come out and arise, as a result of all this. But nevertheless, Aaron says to Moshe Rabbeinu, "I didn't even make it. No one made it. What happened? They threw all this gold and silver into the furnace, into the fire, and this thing came out. This golden calf emerged on its own." And the Medrash says not only did it emerge on its own, but it came out bleeding. Not bleeding, but bleating, like a calf. It was alive. It was a golden calf that was alive. It was able even to eat grass. That's what it says. Now that sounds, well, so what? Grass, what's the big deal? So what's the history? How did the golden calf come to be? How is this the Metzias, the reality that they ended up with, that Aaron says it came out on its own? There's obviously some significance. If they didn't do it themselves, even though that might have been their intention, maybe they wanted to make a golden calf. But why did this thing come out on its own? So there's a history, right? The gold, it was just one aspect of it. So the Medrash says, you know how this happened? This happened because when Moshe, you have to trace back in history. Go back to Parshas V'Yechi. And then at Parshas V'Yechi, Yosef says to his brothers, look, I'm going to die before the rest of you, okay? But just do me a favor. Promise me. I mean, Hashem's he's going to remember us. He's going to take us out at some point in the future. I can promise you that. It may take 100 years or so, but you will go out. And when everyone does leave, take an oath that you will take my bones up with you to Eretz Yisrael to be buried there instead. So they take that oath, they promise that, and as a result of that, when they're finally coming to leave, it's now, Higiyas Man, let's say, this is the time this is Mitzrayim, the exodus is taking place. So at that point in time, Moshe Rabbeinu, he knows this promise has to be fulfilled. They should not leave Mitzrayim without this. Oaths are serious things. You take a real oath, it's not something you just, take lightly. It's a very serious thing. So therefore, Moshe felt compelled to go find the bones of Yosef and take them out. But where were they? If they're just sitting in some cemetery somewhere, some graveyard, just exhuming the remains and taking them out and taking them with you. People do that today. Lots of people get transferred from outside of Eretz Yisrael to Eretz Yisrael. They're dug up and reburied in Eretz Yisrael because there's a big Indian to be buried in Eretz Yisrael. So but he wasn't. He wasn't buried in the ground per se, and no one seemed to know where he was, where the bones of Yosef were. The Egyptians apparently were aware of this promise that was made to Yosef by the Jewish people. Somehow they took it seriously. It was back at that time, and they decided to hide the coffin of Yosef. So where they put it? Well, as Hashgacha Pratis would have it, fortunately, there was one person still living, hundreds of years, old, still living, who happened to be there when Yosef was being hidden, and she knew where he was, and she was able to tell Moshe Rabbeinu. She was Serach Bas Asher, the daughter of Asher, and she was the only one remaining still from Yosef's generation at that time. And she knew, and therefore she was able to tell Moshe Rabbeinu that the Egyptians had put him into a metal coffin and sunk him in the Nile River. That's where they put Yosef, in a metal coffin, the bottom of the Nile River, because that way the Jews would not be able to leave Mitzrayim without the coffin, without the bones, really, right? And the second reason why was because when Yaakov Avinu was blessing the Shvatim before he died, somehow the Egyptians must have learned Chumash with Midrashim, to understand these things, because these are things that we only find in the Midrash. That Yaakov Avinu, he called Yosef a shore. He called him an ox, because the ox is a symbol of blessing, really the symbol of fertility. So the Egyptians, in order to make sure that the Nile River never was going to suffer again, so they wouldn't have a drought like they had in Yosef's time, they took Yosef and put him into the Nile River, A, to hide him, and B, to bless the river so there'd always be fruitful, the water would always flow in the Nile River. And Sarah saw this, she knew this, so she told Moshe Rabbeinu exactly where it was. And as a result of that, he was able to get to the location, but that was only half the problem. It was the easy part of the problem. The more difficult part of the problem was, how do you get a metal coffin from the bottom of the Nile River to surface and float to the surface and take it with you? How do you do that? Today, it's no big deal. We have special, diving devices and ways to go down. I guess people could have, if they wanted to, hold their breath and go down and do it, but they were in a rush, leaving Mitzrayim. Everybody else, by the way, was collecting gold and silver and all the different things that the Egyptians were supposed to give to them on their way out. Only Moshe Rabbeinu was involved in this by himself. So he knew Kabbalah. We know that because it says also that when he killed the Egyptian, back in Parashat Shmos, he didn't actually hit him physically, but rather he used one of the names of Hashem. He used the name of God to cause the soul to flee the Egyptian and die. So he used Kabbalah for that. So he definitely knew Kabbalah. Where did he learn it from? I don't know, but that's what it says. And it was just a fun fact that soul then left the Egyptian and then went to Yisro. Yisro actually inherited that soul, because after the Shem Hashem, after Moshe used the name of God to kill the Egyptian, it killed the Egyptian, but had the effect of rectifying the soul. And that soul came from Cain. So therefore, that soul went to Yisro, who also had a part of the soul already from Cain. He had the neshama from Cain, which is a good part. And this joined up with Yisro, and that's probably when he converted to Judaism. That's probably when he decided to leave behind. Actually, he doesn't convert to Judaism until the Parashat Yisro. But that's probably where he started. He decided to leave behind all the idol worship that he'd been testing out and checking out the entire time. He got the extra burst of soul. So he used Kabbalah. And what he did in this case, he took a gold plate, some type of plate, and he wrote on it, Alei Shor, arise shore, arise shore. That's what he wrote on the plate. Rav Valbi later on wrote a famous Sforim, also called Alei Shor, based upon these words. But he also added something else. Apparently that wasn't enough. Rise shore, come to the surface. But apparently that wasn't enough. And instead, Moshe added the words, the letters Yud, Lamed, Yud. Yud, Lamed, Yud. Why these three letters? Because we know from tradition that one of the names of God is called the 72-letter name of God. I don't know why it's called the 72-letter name of God, because if you check it out, it turns out that it's actually 72 letters, 72 pairs of three letters. Three letters a pair, but group. 72 groups of three letters each. Each of the three letters is a name of God. Each of them. So there's 72 names of God inside the 72-letter name of God, which is made up of three letters each, so 3 times 72. Right? So that's he took that one, I believe it's the third in the list of names. Yud Lamed Yud. Why that name specifically? I wouldn't have known. But the Arizal speaks about this. The Arizal, first I wouldn't have known Bechalal that he even did this, but the Arizal speaks about this in I think it's Shem Mechazal, and he mentions, because if you look in the Gemara in Brochus, I believe on Hey Amud Beis, I believe there's a Gemara there, and the Gemara on Amud Aleph is talking about Yisurim, the importance of Yisurim, how Yisurim are good to have. They're very helpful. We don't like them, right? We can't wait to get rid of them, and certainly you can if you can, right? But you should know that while you have them, they're a very powerful way to rectify and pay off spiritual debts, etc., etc., etc. The Gemara talks about this. And then it goes to the next side on the Amud base, the second page, where it speaks about how Rav Chia became sick, and Rav Yochanan went to Mevakar Chola. He went to see, what was going on, and he said to him, he said, I don't feel well, and he said, do you accept your Yisurim? He says, I don't accept my Yisurim, and I don't want the reward for them either. It's debilitating. After all this Gemara talking about the need to accept, Yisurim be'ava, it's like that's the ideal state, that you not only put up with Yisurim, but you accept it with love. You understand that God's doing it for your good. That's a very high level to get to. But that's what the Gemara is talking. And here, all of a sudden, the next page, that Tanai is saying, I don't want it. I don't want the Yisurim. I don't want the schar for it, because I can do other mitzvahs instead. I can do more important things than lying here in bed thinking about the fact that I'm not doing what I should be doing. So he says, give me your hand. So he gives him his hand, right? He takes his hand. And the Gemara says, the language of the Gemara is Yehiv lei yedei. Yehiv, he gave, lei to him, yedei, his hand. Now I saw this Gemara about 20 times. And nothing unusual, right? The whole story is interesting. It's faith healing. This is what we call faith healing. He's using, except it's not really faith healing because he understands what he's doing. He's using Kabbalah to heal him. You can do that. Kabbalah does that, right? And we have Kimeyas and we have all kinds of things. This once upon a time that we would do in Pesukim, and people wrote them on their arms sometimes, which is problematic. But it's part of how Chizkiah hid a special book of refuahs, of healing techniques, that some of it may have filtered down over the ages, and of course you have all kinds of different groups of people professing to have such things, but he had it. This was a tradition that probably went back to Adam Arishon, things that actually worked for sure, if you were zeicha to have them work for you. But anyhow, so he gave him his hand, and it says he was able to get up, and he became healed. So the Rizal says the reason why he got up, because it doesn't say what happened. He just gave him his hand, and he got up. So that's all we know. So why? What happened? What changed? Just because they're holding hands all of a sudden, there's something energy flow going into him from Rabbi Yochanan and And the Rizal says no, because the word Yehiv le Yedei is the letters, right? Yud Lamed Yud. And that's a name that's used specifically for elevating things. That's what the Rizal explains. That's what Yud Lamed Yud is. It's specifically the group of three letters of Hashem's name that's specifically used by Mekubalim and prophets and to elevate something. So by saying Yehiv la Yedei, by actually saying the words, that's what the Gemara says. They said the words, they actually spoke the words. That this invoked a name of God that had a certain spiritual energy that was able to heal him. So Gemara asks the question: later on, Rabbi Yochanan gets sick and he has to be visited by somebody else. So why not just do it to yourself? And the answer is, the Gemara says, because a person can't free themselves from their own prison, meaning that we're meant to need other people. It's nice to be independent, and it's nice to be able to heal yourself for sure. But there's something about the fact that Hashem wants us to interact with other people, that they should be a part of our life and we should be a part of their lives, that made him dependent on somebody else to do it for him. And he gets up. So Moshe knew this Kabbalah, and he put this name on the plate and threw it into the river, and lo and behold, right, bubbles, the coffin comes to the surface. And because Moshe said to Yosef, listen, this doesn't work. I've done all I can do. We've fulfilled our vow. Now we're off the hook. We can leave without you. But, be nice to take you with us. So it works, and the coffin floats to the surface. Moshe takes it, and they travel with it all the 40 years in the desert. It went side by side with the Aron HaKodesh, and they asked the question, why is this one next to that one? And the Gemara says they would answer that this one fulfilled what's inside that. So there's a special relationship between Yosef and the Arna Kodesh, which have the Torah inside, the Luchas. And they traveled to Israel, and they was reburied in Shechem, which today that's where Yosef's bones are, in Shechem. That's where they're brought to. But what does it do to the golden calf? that's that's a nice story. There's lots of details, but where are we going with this? So the Medrash says that unfortunately, Micha from the tribe of Dan, he saw this. He saw this going on, and I'm not sure why Moshe didn't take this play with him. Why he didn't seem how some just left it there, maybe for recycling. Not sure. Right? He left it there, and Micha saw this, and Micha went and took the plate. He kept the plate, he hit the plate, and took it with him out of Mitzrayim. And when they got to this whole episode in last week's parsha, and in Parashat Kisisa, building the golden calf. So then he took this plate and he threw it into the fire with all the gold. And because it had this Kabbalistic name on it, right, and Ale Shor, the calf came out. That's what caused the golden calf to come out. This special plate that had Ale Shor on it, and the Yud Lamed Yud name to rise, and it came out, and it was living. Now, that's not the only part of it. There was black magic involved as well. Because the Medrash explains, these are important details that no one talks about. Unless you look at the Medrash and learn these stories. So even the Medrash says, even though it sounds a little childish, it's really for adults, and it has a tremendous amount of sources. And he did a great job of going through there's lots of different Midrashim, and he did a great job of going through them and then synthesizing and putting them in a storyline that you can learn a lot of Medrash from and read as a story. It's very interesting. Anyhow, so it mentions that Yunus and Yumbrus, these were sons of Bilam. Now, Bilam was a sorcerer. His sons were also sorcerers. Somehow, they were in Mitzrayim at the time the Jewish people left Egypt, and they came along with the Jewish people out of Egypt. So they were involved in this whole episode with the golden calf, and they used black magic as well to make this thing happen. So it was a real concoction, so to speak, of different, kosher stuff, not kosher stuff. But the net result was a golden calf. Now, if you want to have a little, detour, a deviation a little bit, detour in the meantime, in the story, that the Rizal explains, like you can't make this stuff up. The Rizal explains that Yunus and Yubros, they were actually specifically, they wanted a golden calf, and they wanted this golden calf to eat the grass. Why eat the grass? Why is the grass so important to the story, as I mentioned at the beginning? Because it turns out that when a person reincarnates into this world, if they have died, there's a couple of reasons why a person reincarnates. One is because they have averas to fix up, sins they did not atone for in the previous lifetime. Or they didn't have averas to fix up, but they didn't fulfill all the positive mitzvahs they could have fulfilled. Not the same thing not to do a positive mitzvah versus doing a negative mitzvah. Eating treif, God forbid, is much more serious than not doing shluch hakan, right? Or even saying shema, because that's a positive mitzvah. We still take it pretty seriously. I mean, Rabbanim used to beat people who wouldn't say the shema. But that was another reason why, or to come back and marry a person's zivug if they didn't have their zivug yet in life, so they might come back to marry their zivug at some point in time, or they can come back to help somebody else, through life. They might not need to reincarnate for themselves, but they can come back. They can reincarnate in somebody else to guide them. It's like what we call siyata d'shmaya, heavenly help. They can come in the form of an extra soul coming to a person to help them to do their mitzvahs better. These are reasons that are brought down in Shar HaGilguli, but in that type of Gilgul, you leave this world as being a person, you come back as a person, you come back in a baby somewhere in the future, right? But if a person doesn't merit to come back because they were so bad, they were so evil, literally a real corruption of mankind, then they will not come back as a human for tikkun. Then they have to climb the ladder, because there are 4 levels of reality, spiritually and physically. The first one is called domim, which means silent, because it refers to the mineral world, which doesn't speak, doesn't really have life to it. Then you have tzomeach, which is the vegetation world, which is all things that grow. Then you have chaya, which is the animal world, and then you have medaber, which is the world of man. So if a person, depending on the type of aver a person does, they might start off on a lower level. So the worst, like Bilam came back as inside of a rock. That's doming. He had to work his way back up again. But that's doming. That's like in the mineral world, so to speak. That's because he abused the power of speech, among other serious sins that he committed. Then someone can come back as grass or a leaf on a tree that falls off, that withers and falls off. That's also in Shar Gilgul. We talk about things like that, and what type of sins might cause that to happen. Or a person can come back as an animal. How many stories here about tzaddikim come back as fish? Not sure why they come back as fish. They should come back as tzaddikim, but a person can come back as an animal, a dog. When I was in yeshiva, there was a dog that entered. Actually, it was before I was in yeshiva, but the story was there already about how a dog actually literally came into the base measures during the learning seder, walked up to a table where she was going on, sat there, like paying attention, just like paying attention. So our mashgiach, who was he was a chassid, he was a very funny guy, he American, and he didn't miss a beat. He said, you see, when he could have learned, he didn't learn, and now that he can't learn, he wants to learn. Talking about the dog, right? So take advantage of the situation. Could be true. I mean, it could have been. It was a joke, because who knows? But it's possible, right? So it turns out that Bilam's father, who was the grandfather, of course, of his sons, they understood that he had reincarnated into grass. And one of the ways to move up the ladder is to have a higher level consume you. So by having the golden calf consume the grass, that was a way of elevating the soul of Bilam's father from the level of Tzomech, the level of Chaya, on its way back to Medaber. But that's like I said, it's a detour. It's a side show, just to show layers of meaning in an episode that we just take completely for granted. It was a bad thing, yes, and we moved on. But no, there's a lot going on in the golden calf, so much so that we Pashas Para. But the main question is, I mean, really, the main question is, how is it possible? Fine, the Yunus and Yumbros did their shtick, did the black magic. Yeah, that's them. That's for sure can result in the golden calf. That they have all these other things that put the gold in, and other things that might have led to the golden, fashioning, But how is it possible to take a plate, right? A golden plate that Moshe Rabbeinu himself had used for a mitzvah, for a holy purpose, to raise, it was a tzaddik doing an act of chesed for a tzaddik. How is it possible for that plate to be used for such a terrible avera? How did Hashem allow that to happen? It just doesn't make sense. How is it possible that this thing that was, okay, everything else was tameh, was impure. Everything else was bad people doing bad things. That I understand can lead to bad things. But how is it possible something used for such good, such kedusha, such holiness, can then instead be used? Our enemies have done several, terrible things with things that we find to be holy. How does Hashem allow it to happen? I mean, one of the most moving, heart-wrenching scenes that my own personal life that I saw, that really it was the first time I saw it, I just stopped. I mean, I just the anger, and that welled up inside of me as I'm looking at this picture. I was looking at Beryl Wine's book on history, his table, coffee table type, books on history, fantastic works, completely well researched, and so much information. And even after seeing it once or twice, you still go back and see more things again. He writes beautifully. But there was one picture, somehow either I missed it the first time or it didn't register. I can't see how it didn't register. But when I saw it, it was like, unbelievable. What was it? The Nazis, Yimach Shemu Zichram, they were able to take a parochas, like the top part over the Arna Kodesh, that usually, in most shuls, they have the curtain itself, and there's a little, direct decorative part on top that to put some pasuk or something on it, right? It says, Zeh Shar Hashem, Tzadikim Yivo Vo. This is the gate of Hashem, that Tzadikim will go, that they'll come through, they'll walk through. And where'd they put that holy piece of cloth? Over the door of a gas chamber. That's where they put it. They somehow, I mean, that's Amalek. Amalek is unbelievable. what he does to taunt us, to try to break us. I mean, the Holocaust, the stories in the camps of how far they went, not just to make us suffer, but to break us, our spirit and our connection to God and our will to live. And take such a holy thing for a sacred Torah, which they knew exactly what it was for, and then to put it over a door like that, as Jews have to walk into the gas chamber, they have to walk under this and look at it and see it. Who recently put Sifrei Torah back into the Honor Kodesh with this, and now they're actually walking. And I thought, wow, that's just like, oh, it was just too much. And Baruch Hashem, and I don't know whether it's because I stopped to think about it, but the Kodesh Baruch Hu just put it into my mind, my head, and turned the whole thing around. The whole thing around. It was a terrible thing. There's no way to minimize what they did, how bad it was, what they meant, and all that. But all of a sudden, there was I can't really call it silver lining in the cloud. It's not really what it was, but there was a deeper meaning. And what was that deeper meaning? It all of a sudden appeared like Hashem was saying to them, anybody who walks through this door into the gas chambers is to me like a Sefer Torah being put back in the Arna Kodesh. Each and every one of you has the din of a Sefer Torah being put back in the Arna Kodesh. Nothing higher than that. We lots of questions, the Holocaust, and you can go on for hours, for years, lifetimes, talking about the Holocaust, why this, why that, why people did that. All that aside, for the time being, just that one message. Avram Avinu is told by Kodesh Baruch Hu, you're going to have a son, your spiritual heir, your legacy. You started something good, and you're worried about how to continue it after you're gone. I have your back. I'm going to give you a son at the age of 100, right? And you're going to be able to teach him what you've learned, and he will continue on what you started. Now bring him up as a sacrifice, but he's not married yet. He doesn't have any kids. Bring him up as a sacrifice. What do you use? Bring him up as a sacrifice. Does Avram say anything? Nothing. Not a word. He brings him up. He's about to shecht him. He goes the full distance. He's about to shecht him. And Hashem finds, don't do that. Don't do what? Don't shecht him. Don't slaughter him. But you told me to slaughter him. No, I didn't tell you to slaughter him. I told you to bring him as a sacrifice, and you did. Now bring him back down as a sacrifice. But I thought and I assumed, that when someone usually brings up a sacrifice, it usually means to sacrifice them. You're right. I knew you would think it. I worded it that way, that you would think like that. So that you would go through the whole test. It would be a test for you without having to sacrifice your son actually. And now he could become that spiritual heir. I promised him. So nothing changed. I didn't change my mind, didn't change the promise. You assumed that because of what you thought. But the key point over here, the key point was how Avram Avinu trusted God for the process. He stuck with him. He didn't let the contradiction, he didn't let the paradox interfere with his emunah, with his trust in God, with his love of God. I mean, he was pushed to the brink. I mean, everything was on the table. Everything was on the line. There was nothing left. How is he going to go home and tell his wife, who died anyhow, the Decatur, right? But how is he going to go home and tell Sarah, that wonderful, miraculous child we had in our 90s and 100s, remember that? And it was going to be the one to continue on what we started? I killed him. You what? Yeah, God told me to. He did. Whatever has to happen. Whatever has to happen. Doesn't make sense. Oh, it just goes against the grain so much. So much. Until you realize that, as smart as we are, we're not that smart at all. Really, we know a lot compared to what we once didn't know, right? But compared to what there is to know, compared to what God knows, what his plan is, I mean, if you just learn Kabbalah and you see how complex the world is, so much. Forget about quantum mechanics. That's kids' play compared to Kabbalah. Yeah, I'm not saying that it's easy to learn. I'm not saying the equations are not complicated, but I'm just saying they only deal with the physical world. They only deal with such incredibly important questions and highlights, but it's always the questions. It's always the questions. Always the questions. Person has a question, they can't find an answer. assumption is there isn't one. I can't know it. If it doesn't fit, it must not work. It must not be true. How many people have turned their back on God, on Torah, on Judaism, on the world to come because of a question? Question they had, a contradiction they saw. What we're supposed to do? Not ask the question? You can ask the question. God doesn't, you can ask the question. Look at the Barbanel. We ask questions. That's what we do. We Jews ask questions. And we have a Seder once a year that centers around four sons who are asking four questions, one question per son. You can ask questions. It's good to ask questions. It's good to wonder. The Jewish people are compared to a Yonah, a dove, right? That's the bird because a dove is monogamous. Apparently, if a Yonah loses its spouse, it will not remarry or whatever Yonahs do, right? It won't find a spouse again. Loses one spouse, that's it, the rest of its life, no matter when it happens. So likewise, we, the Jewish people, never turn from God to go anywhere else. God's our spouse forever, so to speak. So we're compared to a Yonah dove. That's what Gemara says. Just like the wings of a dove protect it, so likewise Shem acts like the wings and protects the Jewish people. The word Yonah has the word Yavan inside of it. That's not a coincidence. Yavan is Greece, right? Yavanit is Greek. Salad Yavanit is a Greek salad, right? Yavan is Greek. That's Greece, right? The Greeks are kind of like not say the antithesis, but they're kind of like the Jewish people, but on the other side, so to speak. What's interesting is that the Medrash was talking about the four exiles the Jewish people are going to have to go through, right? Bavel, Medai, Yavin, and of course Edom. And now we have Yishmael, as a dessert. So it turns out that the chaos referred to in the second verse, that refers to Galus Bavel. The Vohu, right, which is also like, the void, corresponds to Medai. The deep, Rome, because it goes on forever and ever and ever, a long time, thousands of years. But the Choshech, that's Greece. I went to university. The Greeks were called the light unto mankind. They're the basis of modern science and modern thought, and et cetera, et cetera. Darkness of all the nations in the world, they're the darkness? Yes. You know why? Because Yavan is Yud, Vav, Nun Sofit. The exact same three letters, three different sizes. A Yud is a small little line, then a Vav is a little bit longer line, and then a Nun Sofit is longer, right? To indicate that the Greek way is to investigate. You look, if you can't find an answer, you look deeper. And if you still can't find the answer, you look deeper yet. That's the Nun Sofit, the end of the word. What happens if you still can't find the answer? You give up on God. You give up on truth. You do your own thing. Can't find the answer? We should be able to find the answer. We're human beings. We should be able to understand and work it all out. If you can't work it out, it must be that the answer doesn't exist. But the word Yonah has Yavan at the beginning, Yud Vav Nun, because we also believe you should investigate, ask questions, research, try to do as much as you possibly can to see how God made the world and runs the world, et cetera, the whole thing like that. But at the end of the word is the letter Hey, which always stands for Hashem. Because the Jewish people, when we get to that wall, we go back to God. We don't say, oh, I can't understand, therefore it must not. No, we don't say that. I can't understand. Right now in history, how many things have we not understood? And then years later, or decades later, or hundreds of years, we understand. The knowledge is evolving when it comes to the world. But in the meantime, we go back to God because that's all there is. That's the reality. And He knows everything. And His truth is the truth, the ultimate truth. The word Sion, right, which is the name the prophets used to describe the Jewish people in redemption, the redemptive state. Atzadi with Yavan. Because it's telling you that the only way you can go from the Yavan to the Hey is to start off with the Tzadi before. Tzadi is like Tzadik. You have to first be righteous, as the Gemara says, as the Torah says, Derech Eretz Kadma Torah. that before you can learn and be properly impacted by the knowledge to be taken closer to God and not away from Him, you have to first work on your midos. You have to first be a humble person and be willing to accept the fact that you have limited knowledge and trust God for the rest of it. And then you can learn and investigate, because you'll end up with the hay in the end. This is really part of a much larger discussion, right? But that's the reason why Parshas Par is coming now, this Shabbos. Not just because this is the time we have to matar ourselves, we have to purify ourselves in preparation for the Korban Pesach. That's pshat for sure. But we're also going to Pesach. Pesach is the bris. It's the covenant. Hashem stepped into history and interfered in mankind's way of running the world and made a covenant. He did it based upon bris avos, a covenant with the Jewish people. And what was that covenant? What we say, Shir Shirim on Shabbos Chol HaMoed, right? Song of Songs by Shlomo Melech, about the love relationship between God and the Jewish people, the unbreakable love relationship between God and the Jewish people. So yeah, Parshas Par is preparing us for Pesach, but not just in terms of purifying us spiritually to be able to be makriv Korban Pesach, but more importantly, preparing our mindset to be able to give ourselves over to Kadosh Baruch Hu to full emunah, no matter what happens next, in order to be able to keep that relationship going, burning strongly forever. Shabbat Shalom.